In this video, we're going to look at the concept, the form and the function of the present simple tense. We often think of the present simple as the easiest tense of English. However, it causes a lot of the inaccuracies that we hear in student language. This is possibly because it is such a simple tense, so it's overused by students in place of other present tenses. There are three main problems associated with the present simple tense for learners. Firstly is the use of the S ending, so the changed verb form in the third person, and students often are not sure about when to apply that S ending onto the verb. Secondly, the question form and negative form in the present simple is actually quite complex, with the use of a do auxiliary and perhaps an S ending, and sometimes the do auxiliary which isn't used depending on the question type. Thirdly, it's the way that the present simple can collocate with certain present time phrases and not others in more complex sentences. These are all issues that cause problems for learners at times working with the present simple. So let's turn to a timeline now to look at the concept of the present simple tense. As we can see, we've drawn our line, meaning time, going from left to right, and we've marked now in the centre of the timeline to ensure that we're talking about a present tense. So first, let's look at action verbs, which we can use in the present tense. The concept behind these verbs is that they are repeated or regular or habitual. There is more than one action happening in a present simple tense. They happen around now, but may not be happening exactly now. That would be represented by the present continuous tense, which, remember, is an unfinished action at the time of speaking. We can tell present simple tense by the time reference that we use. So if we talk about actions which happen every day or every week, every month, every year, then that's a repeated action in a regular way, which can be used in the present simple. We can also use the adverbs always, regularly, or sometimes. Again, these imply that the action's happening several times and it's not just one action happening right now. We can also look at the number of times that the action happens by talking about an action which happens once or twice or 3 times a day, a year, a week, or whatever. Again, these are repeated and regular actions, so they happen more than once. So on the timeline, being a simple tense, remember we show simple tenses by using points in time, or here I'm using crosses to denote the total action, the complete actions as they happen. And we can see here we've got 5 actions happening repeatedly, regularly. They could be happening on days of the week, so something that happens every day. They could be years, so this could happen every year, like going on holiday every year. So this is an action verb in the present simple. A second type of verb which we can use in present simple are what we call state verbs. Now, state verbs are verbs which have a constant effect, so they're always true. And these are verbs such as love, like, hate, believe, want, where we don't start and stop loving or liking something usually. So the concept behind the verb is a sort of a constant that travels all the way across time through now. For state verbs, we generally don't need a time reference because they're always happening. They don't stop when we go to sleep, or we can't choose to stop and start them, so they just happen all the time. And state verbs, they already have this permanence meaning in them. So again, we don't need a time reference to show how often they happen or how many times they happen. That just doesn't work for state verbs. And it's important to draw the contrast between a permanent state verb and a temporary continuous tense, for example, the present continuous. And we can test this by thinking of a verb which is used in the present simple or the present continuous and has a slightly different meaning. For example, live. If you say that you live in the UK, that's seen as more of a permanent idea where you're there for a long period of time. It's kind of your usual living place. This can be contrasted with the present continuous. If you say, I'm living in the UK at the moment, it implies that it's a temporary condition and that you'll be moving on somewhere else. So a state verb can be shown by just a simple line going right the way across from the past through now to the present, but focusing on the fact that it's one action or it's one verb which is happening all the way across from beginning to end, rather than the repeated crosses or spots, which are the routine or regular actions. So we could say believe, for example, I believe that it's going to rain this afternoon, would be a simple verb, even though it's right now. Believe is seen as a state verb, which we use in the present simple. We could also talk about, do you believe in God? Which would be a permanent situation. You either believe or you don't believe in God, so that's always true. This is the same for the verb like. If you like chocolate, you generally don't stop and start liking chocolate. You just either like it or you don't like it. So it's a sort of always true state verb. Right, so let's look at the form of the present simple tense. Although it's called a simple tense, doesn't mean the grammar is particularly simple, and it can cause some of the biggest problems, the most persistent problems for learners, even though it has a relatively easy set of grammar rules to follow. So let's look at positive sentences first. So in positive present simple sentences, when we use the pronouns I, you, we, or they, we simply use the infinitive form of the verb. For example, I walk to work every day, you walk to work every day, we walk to work every day, or they walk to work every day. So walk there, the walk verb, stays the same because it's the infinitive form. However, if we use the third person, he, she, it, we need to add an S ending onto the verb. So where we would say, I eat something, he eats eggs every morning, and we add that S on the end. This is the troublesome thing for learners to remember generally. More often than not, learners will use the infinitive form for every person, so that's a common fossilized error which comes from early stages of study and a lack of correction at early stages of study. And we can change that pronoun there to she, and it stays the same. She eats, or it doesn't eat generally, so we can change the verb. It rains a lot in spring with that S there on the end of the verb. So to teach this at an early level of study, we can use pronunciation drills to help students to process this S on the end of the verb and to help integrate that into their sentences. So I would suggest using a back drilling approach, which deals with connected speech. So it uses the S ending as a kind of springboard into the next sound. If the next sound is a vowel, for example, here, the S sound joins onto the following vowel, and it becomes like a connected Z. So if we start by drilling Z, we can build back from Z into rains. It rains a lot. Same with the example, eats eggs, eats eggs. So we would start the back drill by focusing on that S moving into the following vowel or the next syllable, and we would start with the syllable segs, segs, and then we might drill back to eats eggs, and then she eats eggs, and then that S, although it's kind of intrusive into the sentence, the students are reminded that it's there because you can hear it, and it's a nice drill, nice kind of creative way of drilling that S into a sentence. So, continuing with the form, we can look at negative sentences. Now remember that simple tenses take a do auxiliary, so in their negative form, the simple tense will have a don't or a doesn't. That's a present form of do, and it's in the negative, so be subject plus don't or doesn't plus infinitive. And again, this depends on the person of the sentence. So with the pronouns I, you, we, and they, we would say that the do auxiliary takes the don't form. So I don't like, you don't like, we don't like, they don't like. However, if we change to the third person, again we need that S in there somewhere, and there it is in the middle of doesn't. So he doesn't like, she doesn't like, it doesn't like. And there's the S on the do auxiliary. So moving on to questions. Again, in simple tenses, question forms use the do auxiliary again. So this time the auxiliary is do or does, it's not a negative form, so it's the positive form of the auxiliary, but the grammar changes the position of the subject and the auxiliary. So in a yes or no question, it would be do you, or does he, does she go on holiday every year? And again, the infinitive verb is used because it's after that do auxiliary. So that's the structure of yes-no questions, where we have the auxiliary first, then the subject, then the verb. So moving on to another type of question, a subject question. So this is where the answer to the question is the subject of the sentence. We're asking about the subject. We would need a WH question, a question word such as who or what or which. Then the verb would have an S on the end, or there would be an infinitive verb with a complement depending on the person. So for example, if we want to ask who goes on holiday every year, remember the answer to this would be the who subject. So who goes on holiday every year? The answer would be Steve goes on holiday every year. We're asking about Steve. So there we need the WH with no auxiliary and the correct form of the verb. Another question could be, which animals eat grass? So this time we've got an S on the noun animals. We're asking about the animals, which animals. So the verb does not have an S on the end. This is a nice trick to teach students where the S goes. We can say the S ending either goes on the verb or on the noun, never both. So when we're thinking about present simple sentences, and again putting that S in there, we can think about how to get the students applying the S ending to either the verb or the noun. As long as they know which is which, then their sentences will be accurate. So a good teaching idea for this is to use a transformation exercise. So a procedure for a class using this kind of sentence transformation exercise would be, firstly, you highlight the rule, and this is often effective by doing a noticing task, where you present the students with some sentences, and they have to identify or notice where the S endings go. Are they on the noun or the verb? Are they on both the noun and the verb? Are they on neither the noun nor the verb? No, there's always an S on one of those things, either the noun or the verb. So then students can work on gapped sentences where either the subject is missing, or you have to put an S on the end of the noun or on the end of an infinitive verb. For example, like this. So you have a gap at the beginning, a gap after the noun, a gap after the verb, and we can use different possibilities for this. We can put the S on the end of the noun, in which case we don't need one on the verb, so elephants like, or the elephant, we need to add the because there's only one elephant, and then we put the S on the end of the verb, so noun or verb with the S on the end. Same thing, we use the verb want to go to the party, and either you have a form which doesn't require an S, or you change and the S goes onto the end of the verb. So at an early stage of study, this can be a good way of highlighting that movement of the S either onto the noun or onto the verb. So let's think about how we can put this together to form a nice practice activity. And a good one for present simple is by building chain sentences or chains of sentences. And this is achievable in a game which is often called I went to the shops, or my granny went to the shops is another variation. I tend to use present simple verbs which we do every day to practice this though. For example, we can get the first student saying something they do every day. So every day I brush my teeth. And then the next student has to add something to the chain. Every day I brush my teeth and have a shower. The third student adds something else, have a shower and get dressed. And then after you do this 5 times, ask a student about what another student did. So we go refer back to student 3, say, and we say, okay, so what does student 1 do every day? Now the answer to that question has to change the person, so it has to be he or she, and therefore the S has to go on the end of the verb. So we're moving from the first person, where we need no S, or just the infinitive verb, and then when they're reporting back, it changes to he brushes his teeth. So you have to transform the sentence to describe what the other student does. So after you do the 5 questions thing and you ask a student to refer back to one of their peers, you can hand it over to the students in groups and get the groups playing their own rounds of building their own chains of sentences. So then the students will build a new chain, and they have to ask and answer each other about their change. So again, this brings in question forms or questions and answers about each other's ideas in the what they do every day. And you could play a game where the student who remembers the most actions maybe wins the game, or you score points according to how accurate the sentence is, or something like this. And to add challenge, you can move on to chains of 6 or 7 or 8 links to make it a bit harder to remember maybe, or to make it more of a memory challenge. So this game practices positive forms, negative forms, and question forms as they talk about what they did every day, or the different sentences that students have created. It focuses on the person of the sentence, the subject of the sentence, and whether we put an S ending onto the verb. And it generates real interaction, and therefore probably more engagement. So they're talking about what they really do every day, and they're interacting about the language that they've used in the classroom, which is always good for consolidating new language. So as a final task, think about something that you do to teach the present simple. Do you cover all of those forms, the positive, the negative, and the question forms? And if you do, how many different question forms do you cover in your classes? Do you focus your students on the use of S endings? Do they still have problems with this? Think about how you can fix it through interaction and appropriate tasks. So think about the task that you use and then adapt it. Make it better so that it includes all aspects of concept and form and gives the students a nice wide range of practice of this simple but somehow quite tricky form.